Hello and welcome back to Principles of Micro with James Bland. Today we're going to be learning about market efficiency, and basically what we're going to be doing is adding up consumer surplus and producer surplus. Okay. Now I want to begin this class with the caveat that you're going to be learning a whole lot of really nice properties about markets. And there is nothing wrong with these really nice properties of markets. It's just we need to understand when these properties of markets are actually there and when they're not. And so, as Mankiw teaches it, we're currently in Chapter 7 of his Principles of Micro book, and we're doing Chapters 7, 8, and 9, which are loosely what I call the markets are good chapters. But then we're going to get into chapters 10, 11, and 12, which are also, you could think about those as the markets are bad chapters, or at least markets don't always perform as well as you learned in chapters 7, 8, and 9 chapters. Okay, so we're going to basically finish up this chapter in terms of my video lectures by asking what is the total benefit people get from a market and how can we maximize it? Okay, so before we start, we're going to make two very important assumptions, which we're going to hold for this chapter and the next two of Mankiw, and then we're going to spend probably the remainder of the course thinking about what happens when those assumptions are not true. So the first one is that all the benefits go to the person who buys the good. And what this assumption is going to get for us is that consumer surplus is going to be a good measure of the benefits that people get out of buying the good and consuming it. Okay, this is going to be a great assumption in a lot of circumstances. It's also going to be a terrible assumption in other circumstances. For example, where I live in Ohio, we're actually really close to the border with Michigan, where you can buy a whole lot of really fancy fireworks. So on July 4th, instead of going to a publicly run fireworks show, my family just sets up a whole lot of lawn chairs in our backyard, and we watch the fireworks show basically in 360 degrees around our house of all our neighbors letting off fireworks. And we didn't produce the fireworks, we didn't consume them in that we didn't buy them and let them off, but we're definitely enjoying them. And so that is a situation where all of the benefits do not go to the person who buy the good. In fact, there are a whole lot of people with fireworks shows that did not buy the fireworks that benefited from them. Okay, so watch out for that situation coming up in the next few chapters, but we're going to forget about them for the moment. Okay, the second assumption we're going to make, is that all of the costs are borne by the seller of the good. And this means that producer surplus is going to be a good measure of the benefits associated with trade as well. Some good examples of situations where this isn't the case. you could think about, well, pollution is the classic example of this. For example, when I'm not teaching online, unfortunately, I have to drive to work, and you neither sold me that gas, I'm assuming, or rode in my car, but because of that, you breathe less clean air. Okay, now it's a cost that you had to endure that's a result of a trade that you had nothing to do with. Okay, so both of these are examples of externalities, which we haven't sort of formally covered except as a brief heads up in Chapter 1 of ManQ. And we're going to assume that these things are not part of the markets that we're studying and just sort of put them on the back burner at the moment. But please remember that these are really, really important parts of economics. And as a result, this would be a very dangerous part for you to be finishing the course. So please hang around at least until you get to Chapter 10 of ManQ. Personally, this is when microeconomics started to become interesting to me. Chapter 10, that is. But at the moment, we're going to understand what happens in markets when both of these assumptions are true. Or at least, what benefits do we get, we as society get, out of markets when these assumptions are true. And really, the usefulness of these assumptions is that the benefits of society can be just split up between the benefits to consumers and the benefits to producers, because if all the benefits go to the person who buys the good, all of the costs of the trade are borne by the seller of the good, then there's no one else out there who is benefiting or incurring costs as a result of these trades. So we can essentially just add up consumer and producer surplus to get total surplus, to get total surplus, which is going to measure the total benefits that society gets out of this market existing and people interacting with it. But just remember that those benefits are only going, by assumption, to consumers, and all the costs are being borne by producers, and the reason producers are willing to bear these costs is that they're given money to do it. Okay, so let's have a very brief recap of what we did with consumer surplus and producer surplus, and then we can move on to adding these things up together. Okay, so I'm going to draw two diagrams here. Here's quantity, here's price. Make sure they're all going to fit on my page. Quantity and price. So we've got a demand curve and we've got a supply curve. And yes, we're going to put these together very soon, but at the moment we're just going to recap what happens to producer and consumer surplus and how we measure it. Okay, so to begin with, let's start out with a relatively low price. Okay, so let's call this PL. Okay, take that across here, all the way to the supply curve. Here's my PL on the supply diagram. Obviously, this isn't an equilibrium because quantity demanded, let's get my superscripts right. Quantity demanded low and quantity supplied low look like they're different. But to begin with, we're going to work out, well, what benefits do consumers get out of participating in this market. And so in this situation, we worked out that consumer surplus is always going to be equal to the area between the price consumers pay and the demand curve and to the left of the quantity that's traded. Okay, and the reason we want to have this last bit here, which I'm sorry, neglected to mention in one of my previous videos, is that we don't want to count the trades that don't happen. Okay, so let's assume that consumers are actually buying this amount. Consumer surplus is going to be equal to the area of this triangle here. Okay. And then producer surplus is going to be equal to the area between the price sellers receive and the and the supply curve, and to the left of the quantity traded. Okay, so on this diagram here, and again, to the left of the quantity traded, we're using that because we don't want to count the trades that don't happen, right? We don't want to count a benefit to a seller who doesn't sell their item. Okay, and so the producer surplus at this low price, whoa, what happened there? Producer surplus at that low price is going to be equal to the area in this red triangle here. Okay, but what if we change price a little bit? So see what things are happening here. Go to a different color. Let's put in a high price up here. Best of my ability, draw a horizontal line. So here's a high price for the supply curve. At this high price, we want to count the area to the left and between the price consumers pay, right, which is here, so for demand, and the demand curve. So we're adding up everything between the price consumers pay and the demand curve. And so here, this area in here is consumer surplus at the high price. And to do the same for producer surplus, we're looking at the area between the price sellers receive, which here is just PH. Okay, but think about what this means when we impose taxes. These two numbers will be different. And the supply curve, so the area above the supply curve. And so that would be this area here. Okay, so looking ahead, and obviously I'm going to do a second video on this, if we put this together, what we're going to have, here's price, here's quantity, here's a demand curve, here's a supply curve. In equilibrium, this is going to pin down our total surplus. Okay, so here's equilibrium quantity, here's equilibrium price, and if we have, well, we have consumer surplus is going to be the area between the price consumers pay, which since we don't have taxes is the equilibrium price, and the demand curve, right? So this triangle here is our consumer surplus. And then our producer surplus is going to be the area between the price sellers receive, which again is the equilibrium price because we don't have any taxes, and the supply curve, right? So here's the price sellers receive, and here's the portion of the supply curve that's to the left of the quantity that's being traded. So here's our producer surplus, and that's equal to this area here. Okay, and then if we're adding these things up, then we can just add up both of these areas to get total surplus. Okay, and that is going to be equal to the area when we add both of these areas up, right? So this area here. Let's label that properly. Total surplus. Okay, so this has been video 1 of at least 2. And so see me back soon for some more information on total surplus and how we can maximize it. Okay, I'm James Bland. See you later.